African continent, Nigeria's rising public debt is a big talking point in the country as the country's debt management office puts the debt at slightly over $108 billion, saying that could increase even further when the loans obtained by the government from the country's central bank are eventually added to the total debt stock. Now, the West African nation is said to be facing a huge revenue shortage, which may force the new government to borrow more to fund its program. But the Debt Management Office is warning against additional borrowing. The government wants to honor all the country's debt obligations, despite its 2023 budget deficit standing around $15 billion. But analysts say it will need all the support it can to get its revenue generation drive. And let's have more details of that in this report.
In issuing the warning against additional borrowing, the Debt Management Office says already 73.5% of the country's revenue this year will be used to service debt. It warns that the high debt-to-revenue ratio poses a threat to debt sustainability.
So our revenue to GDP as a country is extremely low. And the reality is that, in the medium to long term, countries survive on revenues where they have enough and borrowing that is required, but you can't survive continuously on borrowing.
Nigeria's total debts to GDP ratio is projected to hit 37.1% this year, just less than 2.9% of the government-imposed limit of 40%. Rather than utilize that 2.9% headroom to borrow more, the DMO wants the new government to instead do all it can to increase revenue from the projected $13.7 billion in the 2023 budget to over $20 billion. That will be quite a challenge, but the government is trying to shore up its revenues. It removes the controversial petrol subsidy, which could translate to a potential saving of over $4 billion annually for the country. It's also moved to float the local currency by removing government pegs. The government says several other revenue-generating measures are in the works, but analysts say further borrowing cannot be completely ruled out.
It is likely that there will be more borrowing, but there will be less borrowing. Because given the steps that have been taken, we are likely to see an improvement in the fiscal space. The fuel subsidy has been a major burden and one of the biggest contributors to the debt challenge that we have. Now that the fuel subsidy challenge is out of the way, we expect to see less burden, on the fiscal operations of government.
Nigeria's 2023 budget has a deficit of around $15 billion. The government says it will honor all the country's debt obligations, dismissing any risk of a default. But analysts say it will need all the support it can get in its revenue generation drive.
I would strongly suggest that Nigerians should tighten their belts. It's going to be a bumpy ride in the coming months in terms of their disposable income. There's going to be serious, significant pressure on their disposable income.
As the government pushes for more revenue, it's also embarked on an aggressive drive to attract foreign investors as well. Deji Badimasi, CGTN, Lagos.